Bay St. Louis in Mississippi was picturesque on that sunny April morning of 1906. The bay's shimmering waters stretched far and wide, reflecting the clear blue skies above. The soft sand on the shore glimmered in the sunlight, inviting Willie McDonald and his friends for a refreshing swim. Willie, a young and adventurous 14-year-old student from the area, was excited as he jumped into the cool waters of the bay with his friends. The salty tang of the water and the gentle breeze on his face made him feel alive, and he reveled in the freedom of swimming in the open waters. Having swam in the Bay of St. Louis several times, Willie felt confident that nothing could go wrong. He was in good company with his friends and surrounded by the beauty of the bay. What could possibly go wrong? As Willie dove into the cool azure waters of Bay St. Louis, a refreshing rush of relief enveloped him, casting off the weight of the oppressive summer sun. He and his friends, laughing and splashing, swam farther away from the sandy shore, the distant horizon beckoning them forward. But as Willie looked around, he noticed his friends were spread out and growing farther apart, some much farther from him than he had realized. Despite his swimming prowess and the calm waters, a tinge of unease crept into his mind. He decided to head back, kicking his legs and pushing his arms through the water toward the shore. To reunite with his friends, Willie propelled himself through the water, a determined force cutting through the aqueous medium. However, fate dealt a sinister blow as a colossal 15-foot bull shark emerged from the depths, its predatory instincts triggered. With a display of raw power, it lunged towards Willie, its jaws clamping onto his leg with an iron grip. The force behind the shark's bite was beyond comprehension, an overwhelming surge of strength that effortlessly tore through the delicate barrier of Willie's flesh and bones. It was as if the predator possessed an otherworldly prowess, rending apart what once provided protection and mobility. The pain courting Willie's body was a searing current, a jolt that ignited a primal scream of unimaginable agony, echoing through the surrounding expanse. As the monstrous shark clamped down on Willie's leg, it thrashed about with frenzied aggression, like a warrior in the throes of battle. Its powerful jaws continued to maul Willie, causing irreparable damage to his body and spirit. Willie's friends, who had been swimming nearby, were frozen in shock, unable to process the horrific scene before their eyes. The sight of their friend being viciously attacked by a predator of the deep had left them reeling, their minds struggling to comprehend the surreal nature unfolding. None of Willie's friends could summon the courage to intervene, despite their terror. They were all too aware of the shark's immense power and the threat it posed to their lives. Fear had taken hold of them, paralyzing them with a primal instinct for self-preservation. At that moment, they were reduced to mere spectators, their hearts heavy with despair, as they watched their friends suffer at the beast's jaws. The sound of bones snapping echoed through the water as the shark, in a final act of savagery, tore Willie's leg from his body with a sickening crunch. The predator disappeared into the bay's depths, leaving behind a trail of blood and chaos. Although the shark had released him, Willie was now a mere shadow of his former self. The vicious attack had left him severely injured, his strength waning every moment. He struggled to keep afloat, but his body betrayed him, and he slowly began to sink to the depths of the water. As Willie's vision faded, a strong arm reached out to him, pulling him back to the surface. The grip was firm, a beacon of hope in the darkness. It was a glimmer of salvation in an otherwise hopeless situation, a sign that he might survive this ordeal. Fortune smiled upon Willie as his anguished screams pierced the air, catching the attention of a seasoned fisherman in the vicinity. With a heart-pounding determination, the fisherman, John, wasted no time. He leapt into the water, a hero compelled by compassion to save the young boy from the clutches of the relentless predator. Yet the battle with the shark was far from over. With an eerie intelligence that belied its savage nature, the shark resumed its deadly dance, circling the two figures maliciously. Its menacing presence cast a shadow of impending doom over treacherous waters. The shark lunged forward in a heartbeat, teeth bared and eyes ablaze with predatory hunger. But John, a man with nerves of steel, possessed the knowledge necessary to outwit the primal force before him. With perfect timing and unwavering resolve, he unleashed a powerful punch upon the shark's sensitive nose, a strike fueled by survival instincts and years of experience. The beast, caught off guard by this audacious act of defiance, recoiled in searing pain. Its retreat a testament to the human spirit's indomitable strength. Willie was whisked away to the hospital in a frantic blur, his body a canvas of pain and despair. The doctors, grim-faced and resolute, knew that drastic measures were necessary to save his life. With heavy hearts, they made the harrowing decision to amputate his leg, severing the once vital limb that had been torn apart by the merciless jaws of the shark. In the aftermath of this life-altering event, Willie's gratitude towards John, the brave fisherman that had come to his rescue, knew no bounds. It was an eternal debt of gratitude etched into his very soul. The year was 1948, and the air was chilled with the biting November winds that swept across the waters of the coast of St. John, a small and tranquil island nestled in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Christopher Oswald had just emerged from a long and raucous night of drinking and revelry with his friends, the remnants of the alcohol still clouding his mind and making his steps unsteady. St. John, U.S. Virgin Islands coastline is a breathtaking sight to behold. Towering cliffs of jagged rock rise from the sparkling blue waters below, their rugged peaks carved and shaped by the relentless force of the sea. The waves crash against the shoreline with a mighty roar, sending sprays of white foam shooting up into the air like 1,000 tiny fireworks. But for Christopher and his friends, the beauty of the coastline meant nothing, as they could barely walk after a night of drinking. Christopher Oswald stumbled aboard the boat, reeking of alcohol and teetering dangerously on unsteady legs. The night's revelry had left him in a haze of intoxication, his thoughts muddled and his actions unpredictable. As the boat sliced through the dark waters towards their destination, the gentle lapping of the waves seemed to lull Christopher into a false sense of security. Suddenly, with a drunken laugh, he hurled himself over the boat's edge, his body plunging into the icy water below. Shocked gasps and cries rang out as his friends and the crew watched in disbelief, frozen by the sheer recklessness of Christopher's actions. Desperate to bring him back to safety, they frantically called out to him, their voices carrying over the wind and waves. But Christopher remained stubbornly in the water, his intoxicated mind convinced he was invincible. As the boat drifted aimlessly, the crew's frustration mounted by the second, one of them finally throwing a life buoy connected to a rope, hoping to coax Christopher back on board. But his drunken defiance held strong, and he refused to budge from his position in the water, his careless actions bringing their journey to an abrupt and unwanted halt. Suddenly, the tranquil waters of the night turned into chaos as Christopher's screams echoed through the boat and the surrounding sea. His friends and boat crew frantically searched for him, but their confusion turned to horror when they saw what was happening. The water around Christopher had turned into a crimson pool, and they realized with gut-wrenching dread that he was being attacked by something in the depths. The marshal's trembling hands again threw the buoy, hoping to save Christopher from whatever was dragging him down. But as soon as the buoy landed in the water, a huge bull shark emerged from the darkness, its massive jaws tearing through Christopher's flesh with terrifying power. The shark's razor-sharp teeth gnashed through Christopher's neck and shoulders, sending droplets of blood cascading through the air like a macabre fountain. The screams of Christopher and his friends mixed with the sounds of the water being torn apart by the violent shark attack. The boat rocked violently as the people tried to comprehend the horror unfolding before them. The brutal assault was a heart-stopping moment that shattered the peacefulness of the serene sea. With its powerful jaws and razor-sharp teeth, the ferocious bull shark struck with lightning speed. The gruesome attack was relentless, leaving no chance of survival for poor Christopher. As the shark clamped down on his neck and shoulders, the force of the bite was so strong that it shattered bones and tore flesh apart. Blood gushed like a fountain, staining the surrounding water in a gruesome display of violence. Screams of horror and disbelief echoed as the people on the boat witnessed the terrorizing event. They were frozen in shock, unable to move or speak, as they watched the life drain out of Christopher's body. The once vibrant man was now a lifeless limp figure, a victim of the ruthless predator. The shark's attack was brutal, and it seemed determined to inflict as much harm as possible. With a ferocity that bordered on madness, the beast lunged toward Christopher's defenseless body, its jaws clamping down on the already torn remains of his torso. The water turned into a frenzy of red as the shark whipped its prey back and forth, tearing him apart. The boat's occupants looked on in horror, powerless to intervene as the shark inflicted its brutal assault. With every passing moment, the realization sank that Christopher's fate was sealed. The shark would not let go of its prey until it had claimed its kill. Then, with a powerful pull, the shark dragged Christopher's lifeless body beneath the surface, disappearing into the ocean's murky depths. The only remnants of the tragedy were the waves of blood that continued to ripple across the water's surface, and the severed arm that floated eerily in the water, a haunting reminder of the violent attack that had just taken place. With adrenaline coursing through his veins, the captain hastily maneuvered the boat from the violent whirlpool of blood and carnage. As they sped toward safety, the passengers were shocked and in disbelief at the events unfolding. Despite the immediate report to the authorities, days and weeks of searching proved fruitless, as the body of Christopher Oswald remained elusive, lost to the dark and unforgiving depths of the ocean. It was a cold and misty October morning in 1911, the kind of day where the very air seemed to cling to your skin like a damp, heavy cloak. On the coast of Sewell's Point, Florida, the ocean churned and roiled, its deep blue water stretching out as far as the eye could see. Sewell's Point was a place of rugged beauty, its rocky cliffs jutting out from the shoreline like the teeth of some great sea beast. Here and there, scattered among the rocks, were little pockets of sandy beach, the perfect spot for intrepid fishermen like Jonathan Hansel to cast their lines and wait for the day's catch. As Jonathan sat in his boat, his eyes fixed on the horizon, he felt a sudden tug on his fishing net. It was a strong one that could only mean one thing: he had caught something big. With a grunt of effort, he began to reel in his catch, anticipation mounting with every passing moment. As Jonathan pulled up his fishing net with great effort, the weight of its catch almost toppled his small boat. With a determined look, he heaved and hoisted, sweat beading on his forehead. Finally, the net breached the water's surface, revealing a sight that filled Jonathan with awe: an enormous bull shark trapped within its confines. The creature's menacing appearance was accentuated by its razor-sharp teeth and powerful jaws as it thrashed violently, driven by an instinctual desire to break free. Jonathan's eyes sparkled with exhilaration and anticipation at capturing such a formidable and fearsome predator. Ignoring the danger ahead, Jonathan decided to test his fishing skills to the limit and catch the shark alive. He knew it was a risky move, but the thrill of the challenge overpowered his common sense. Jonathan had been fishing off the coast of Sewell's Point, Florida for years, and had seen his fair share of big catches, but nothing could have prepared him for the 12-foot-long bull shark he had just pulled up in his fishing net. As he stood on the deck of his boat, he could see the massive predator thrashing about, its gills moving frantically as it tried to breathe out of the water. Despite knowing the potential danger, Jonathan became complacent. He underestimated the volatile nature of these creatures and thought he had everything under control. With a false sense of security, He let the net loose to release the fish and the shark onto the deck. But suddenly, the shark jolted into action, catching Jonathan by surprise. In an instant, the massive creature clamped its powerful jaws around one of Jonathan's legs, sinking its razor-sharp serrated teeth deep into his flesh. With a blood-curdling scream, Jonathan's body arched in agony as the razor-sharp teeth of the bull shark tore into his flesh. The pain was unbearable, and his mind struggled to comprehend the horror unfolding. His companion, startled by the scream, rushed to witness the gruesome scene. The once docile shark had transformed into a ferocious and savage predator, its diminished state rendering it even more unpredictable. With relentless fury, the shark thrashed and writhed on the deck, forcefully dragging Jonathan's body in its wake. Blood sprayed in every direction, saturating the deck and leaving behind a haunting shade of deep crimson. As Jonathan's body twisted and contorted in pain, he tried desperately to fight back, his fist pounding against the shark's rough skin. But the shark seemed indifferent to his punches, as if it were a mere annoyance. Its powerful jaws remained locked, and Jonathan's leg was now little more than a mangled mesh of flesh and bone. Antonio, Jonathan's fishing companion, was a man of action, and his instincts kicked in as soon as he saw his friend being attacked by the vicious shark. He quickly reached for the spear, and with all his might, thrust it repeatedly into the shark's body, causing it to writhe and convulse in pain. The thrashing shark and Jonathan's anguished screams filled the air, creating a sense of chaos and panic on the boat. Despite the shark's weakened state, it refused to let go of its prey, dragging Jonathan along the deck like a dog's chew toy. Blood was everywhere, staining the deck red and slick with its sticky metallic scent. Antonio knew he had to act fast before the shark could do more damage. The shark's movements grew weaker with each stab until it finally stopped moving altogether. Its lifeless body lay motionless on the deck, surrounded by a pool of its own blood. Although still in immense pain, Jonathan was free from the jaws of the deadly predator that had attacked him. As Jonathan was rushed to the hospital, his life was slipping away with every second, his once vibrant face now pale, with a painful reminder of the tragedy that had just unfolded. Despite the efforts of the medical staff to save him, his body was rapidly deteriorating due to the massive blood loss and the lethal infection that had crept into his system. Jonathan's breathing became increasingly shallow as the surgery progressed until it eventually stopped altogether. The silence that filled the room was deafening, and it was clear that Jonathan had taken his last breath. The crisp air of a September morning in 1909 sent shivers down Jimmy's spine as he stepped onto the docks of Galveston, Texas. He was surrounded by the sounds of creaking wood and clanging metal as his crewmates worked diligently to prepare their ship for a month-long fishing journey. The shipyard was alive with activity as ropes were coiled and knots were tied precisely. Galveston, Texas was a bustling hub of commerce and industry, with its shipyard serving as the heart of the city's maritime trade. The shipyard was a maze of wooden docks and towering cranes, with ships of all shapes and sizes lining the water's edge. The air was thick with sounds of metal clanging against metal and the rhythmic thud of hammers against the wood. Men in rough work clothes scurried like ants, hauling heavy equipment and materials from one end of the yard to the other. The salty ocean breeze carried the pungent scent of fish, oil, and sweat, filling the nostrils of all who passed through the area. Aboard the ship, Jimmy lounged on the deck, soaking up the warm sun and breathing in the salty ocean air. Suddenly, a loud splash interrupted his peaceful daydreaming. He jolted upright and rushed to the edge of the ship to investigate. His heart leaped in his throat as he saw his crewmate Tony thrashing about in the water, screaming for help. As Jimmy peered into the murky depths, his heart pounding with fear, he could see Tony struggling to stay afloat and injured from the impact. Without hesitation, Jimmy sprang into action, grabbing a life buoy and jumping overboard to save Tony from the treacherous waters. As Jimmy swam towards Tony, The other crew members watched from above, their hearts in their throats. Suddenly, a dark figure loomed beneath the surface, sending shivers down their spines. They knew all too well the dangers lurking in the ocean's depths, and they feared for Jimmy and Tony's safety. Finally, Jimmy reached Tony and expertly fastened the life buoy around him. He signaled to the crew members above to hoist them back onto the ship, and they pulled with all their might. The strain of the effort was evident on their faces as they struggled to bring Jimmy and Tony to safety. As the crew members frantically worked to hoist Jimmy and Tony out of the water, a monstrous creature suddenly exploded out of the waves with terrifying force. It was a massive 14-foot bull shark, its powerful jaws wide open, menacingly showcasing its serrated teeth. The shark moved with lightning-fast speed, lunging towards Jimmy with deadly intent. In an instant, it had clamped its jaws down on his leg, its sharp teeth tearing through flesh and muscle. Jimmy's agonized scream pierced the air, a blood-curdling sound that echoed throughout the shipyard. The shark thrashed in the water, dragging Jimmy with it as it continued its brutal attack. Blood stained the ocean around them, a macabre display of the shark's ferocity and Jimmy's suffering. The crew members watched in horror as the shark mauled its victim into submission, its strength and power overwhelming. They knew they had to act quickly if they wanted to save Jimmy's life, but as they looked on helplessly, they couldn't help but wonder if it was too late. Despite his valiant efforts, Jimmy's bare hands were no match for the ferocious predator that had clamped its vice-like grip on his legs. The water churned around them with a sickening mixture of blood, torn flesh, and salt water as the shark continued its brutal attack. Tony's eyes were fixed on the gruesome scene before him, his mind unable to comprehend the sheer brutality of the creature before him. The shark's massive jaws loomed over Jimmy's legs, ripping and tearing at the flesh with a savage and unrelenting force. The sound of the shark's teeth gnashing together filled the air, a sickening crunch that seemed to reverberate through Tony's entire body. As the moments passed, Tony felt a wave of nausea and fear wash over him, his heart pounding like a drum. He wanted to look away, shield himself from the horrors unfolding before him, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from the gruesome scene. As minutes ticked away, Jimmy's struggles became weaker and weaker, his body succumbing to the pain and trauma inflicted by the vicious predator. The shark seemed to sense its victory, determination, and strength, unyielding as it pulled Jimmy's helpless and mangled carcass deeper and deeper underwater. The crew on the ship was thrown into a state of chaos as they desperately tried to haul Tony back on board as quickly as possible. Their hearts raced with fear and anxiety, their minds reeling from the horror of what they had just witnessed. With trembling hands, they pulled Tony onto the ship's deck, their relief palpable as they saw that he was still alive. But when they looked back towards the water, their joy turned to horror as they saw nothing but a vast pool of crimson, the horrible aftermath of the shark's attack. Tony's physical injuries would eventually heal, but his psychological scars would remain with him for the rest of his days. The trauma of the brutal attack would haunt him, a constant reminder of the fragility of life and the merciless power of nature. The year was 1933, and Miami Beach was a sun, sand, and surf playground. The radiant sun beat down upon the golden sands, heating them up until they were hot to the touch. The ocean waves lapped gently against the shore, inviting visitors to wade in its crystalline waters and find respite from the heat. A kaleidoscope of color and activity engulfed the shoreline. The beach was alive with chatter and laughter of families on vacation, young couples holding hands, and sun-kissed bodies lounging on vibrant beach towels. The air was scented with coconut oil, salt water, and the sweet aroma of iced drinks. But amid the throngs of sun-seekers, one figure stood out, a young man named Tim Martin. Tim was a bold and daring adventurer with a taste for the thrill of the surf. He stood tall and tanned, with hair bleached from the sun. His sinewy arms and legs toned from hours of riding the waves. Tim was the epitome of freedom, fearlessness, and fun, a man who lived his life to the fullest on the wild waves of Miami Beach. On that fateful day, the fearless Tim Martin was out catching waves with a crew of surfers, reveling in the thrill of the ocean's power. The water was choppy that day, the waves fierce and unrelenting, but Tim and his companions were undeterred. Tim felt a sudden impact as he rode the crest of a particularly massive wave, jolting him off balance and sending him tumbling into the water. Disoriented and dizzy, he gasped for air as he flailed in the tumultuous waves. Through the haze of confusion, Tim was frantically looking for the massive object that had bumped into him. Then, in the depths of the frothy waters, he saw a massive silhouette gliding effortlessly in the currents. With his surfboard clutched tightly in his hand, Tim waded cautiously through the churning waters, eyes fixed on the mysterious object. His heart raced with anticipation and a hint of fear as he drew closer and closer, eager to solve the mystery of what had caused his wipeout. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the air, shattering the peacefulness of the ocean. Tim's fellow surfers turned in horror to see their fearless friend writhing in agony, his body convulsing with pain. As they swam frantically towards him, they saw a monstrous shadow emerging from the ocean's depths, a 14-foot-long tiger shark, its jaws gaping wide as it closed in on its prey. In an instant, the ferocious predator clamped down on Tim's torso with a force that could crush bone, thrashing him around in the water like a rag doll. The water turned crimson with blood as Tim fought for his life, his screams muffled by the sheer force of the attack. His friends watched in horror as the shark savagely manhandled its victim, its razor-sharp teeth tearing into flesh and bone. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Tim summoned all his strength and began to punch the massive tiger shark with all his might. His fist rained down on the creature's head and body, but the shark seemed unfazed, its grip on him unrelenting. The other surfers, frozen in shock at first, suddenly sprang into action, their instincts for survival kicking in. With their hearts pounding in their chest, they frantically swam away from the scene, the fear of the deadly predator chasing them. After what seemed like an eternity, the shark finally released its vice-like grip on Tim's body. But it was too late. The damage had already been done. Tim's body was mangled and battered, his flesh torn and bleeding profusely into the water. With all his strength drained from him, Tim clung desperately to his surfboard, using it as a makeshift life raft to keep him afloat. But he knew that he was at the mercy of the ocean and the relentless predator that still circled ominously nearby. As if the first attack wasn't enough, the monstrous shark suddenly reappeared from the ocean's murky depths and with lightning speed clamped down on Tim's shoulder with its razor-sharp teeth. The surfer's body went rigid with pain, and he didn't even have the strength to scream, as the second attack proved fatal. The shark's powerful jaws dug deep into Tim's flesh, rending muscle and bone asunder with frightening ease. The surfer's mangled body went limp as the shark thrashed about in a frenzy, shaking him relentlessly and tearing him apart in a gruesome display of savagery. With one final pull, the shark dragged Tim's lifeless body down into the dark and foreboding depths of the ocean, where it would become just another victim of the endless and unforgiving expanse of the sea. Despite the best efforts of the Coast Guards and lifeguards, they couldn't save poor Tim from the clutches of the monstrous shark. Even as they combed the waters for any sign of him, their efforts proved vain. The ocean had claimed yet another victim. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and it seemed Tim's fate was lost forever to the depths of the sea. But fate had other plans, and one day, a fisherman's net brought up a grisly surprise: Tim's severed head, battered and lifeless, trapped in the net with other creatures of the sea. The sight of Tim's severed head was a chilling one, a stark reminder of the unforgiving and treacherous nature of the sea. A reminder that even the bravest and most adventurous among us are not immune to the dangers that lie in wait just beyond the shore. Morning in 1909, the rugged shorelines of Pauwela, Maui, Hawaii stood steadfast against the rolling waves. Alani, a 19-year-old mother, had grown up with the sea as her constant companion. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was as familiar to her as the rhythm of her own heartbeat. As she gazed out at the endless expanse of the Pacific, she felt the salty mist settle on her skin like a gentle caress. The sky above was a tapestry of blues and grays, the clouds shifting and swirling like living creatures. The rocks at her feet were rough and jagged, yet somehow comforting in their solidity. Alani had always been drawn to the sea, with its ever-changing moods and infinite mysteries. She had spent countless hours exploring the tide pools and watching the ebb and flow of the tides. The sea was a living thing, with a spirit and energy to her. As Alani made her way along the rocky shorelines of Pauwela, the sun beat down on her skin, warming her and filling her with a sense of peace. She had come here to gather opihi, small shellfish that clung to the rocks at the water's edge. The sound of the waves crashing against the shore was a soothing backdrop to her work, and she hummed a tune under her breath as she searched for the perfect shell. But as she reached for one particular stubborn shell, she felt a sudden rush of water around her ankles. Before she could react, a massive wave crashed against the shore, sending her tumbling into the water. Panic set in as she struggled to find her footing, but the currents were too strong, and she was quickly pulled away from the safety of the shore. Alani's body was at the mercy of the ocean's power, the waves crashing over her and dragging her deeper and deeper into the water. She fought to stay afloat, but the currents were unrelenting, and she was quickly losing strength. The water around her was a dizzying blur of turquoise and emerald, the sunlight filtering down in shafts of brilliant light. Despite the churning currents threatening to pull her under, Alani's years of swimming experience served her well. Fiercely, she kicked and fought towards the surface, gasping for air as she broke through the water's barrier. But her relief was short-lived, as a sudden shadow darkened the water beneath her. All 15 feet of a massive great white shark shot towards her with lightning-fast speed, jaws gaping open to reveal its razor-sharp teeth. In a blur of terror and disbelief, Alani watched as the monstrous predator sank its teeth into her legs, the serrated edges slicing through skin and muscle ruthlessly. Alani tried to escape the deadly grip of the predator, but the shark's grip was too strong. Its jaws clamped shut like a vice. With a loud roar, the massive shark thrashed and twisted on the water's surface, its bulk battering Alani like a rag doll caught in a dog's jaws. Her body was flung about with savage force, her head slamming against the water and her limbs twisting and jerking in a frenzied dance of agony. And then, with a sickening crunch, the shark's jaws closed around Alani's legs once again. This time, however, there was no escape. The shark's teeth tore through her flesh and bones like a hot knife through butter, rending her body in two with a savage snap. As the water turned red with Alani's blood, the shark thrashed and twisted in a frenzy of violence. Its jaws were slick with gore, and its eyes gleamed with a cold, ruthless hunger. For a moment, the world seemed to slow to a crawl, and the only sound was the terrible roar of the sea and the crunching of bone. But then, with a final shudder, the shark released its grip on Alani's body and disappeared into the ocean's depths. The shark's hunger was insatiable, and it returned to Alani's battered body with a ferocity that was terrifying to behold. Its jaws snapped and snashed, tearing at her flesh and bones relentlessly. It was as if the shark was determined to leave nothing behind but a pile of shattered bones and tattered flesh. And then, with a final brutal snap, the shark's teeth closed around Alani's neck, tearing her head from her body with a sickening crunch. The sight was a horror beyond words, a violent and merciless act of nature that left no doubt about the true power of the ocean's most fearsome predator. But the shark was not yet satisfied. With a vicious snap of its jaws, it clamped onto Alani's arm and dragged her lifeless body into the depths below, as if to claim its prize and devour it in a hidden lair. After the report of the incident, a desperate search party scoured the shoreline, their eyes scanning the dark waters of any sign of Alani. But they found a gruesome sight that would haunt them for the rest of their days. In the choppy, churning waves, they saw a twisted mass of flesh and bone, torn apart and gnawed by the razor-sharp teeth of a fearsome predator. It was all that remained of Alani, her body reduced to a grotesque jumble of torn flesh and shattered bone. The search party's worst fears were realized as they bore witness to the true power of the ocean's deadliest predator. They knew that Alani had met a violent end at the hands of a merciless killer, her life cruelly snatched away by the unforgiving depths.